Okay, not there yet. So Jan Murray is the information management consultant and trainer. She has extensive practical experience in local government, state government and non-government sectors. Hang on a second, I'm distracted by the technology and I need to give an acknowledgement of country, because here we are standing on normal country today, and it's been a wonderful morning and lunch sessions already, and I'd like to pay my respects to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders present, past and emerging, and acknowledge that normally I would be coming from Gadigal Wongal country in New South Wales, but here we are today in Canberra, so thank you. Now, go back to my speakers. I'm hoping Jan is joining us, but as I said, she's extensive practical experience in local government, state government, non-government sectors and the UK. She's also an accredited trainer and has been involved in library education for more than 30 years. We also have Manting Tsu, who is from an archivist with IATSIS, and Manting has been working in the manuscripts team IATSIS for approximately 3 years. And before she came to Australia for her postgraduate study at ANU, she conducted research on Taiwanese Indigenous music and had led several related research projects. She was also the executive producer of the Indigenous concert, which I'm not going to pronounce, Manting, but maybe you will give it in details. But the English translation is Listen to the Songs of the Sin Vu Duan, which might be the Indigenous Taiwanese, yeah? Okay. So, welcome Manting, and Associate Professor Joanne Evans from Monash University joins us as our third speaker. She's an archival and record-keeping researcher and educator at the Faculty of Information Technology, Monash University, and through an ARC Future Fellowship in 2015 to 2018, she's established the Interdisciplinary Archives and the Rights of the Children research program to address the lifelong identity, memory and accountability needs of childhood out-of-home care. This involves the exploration of participatory design and research strategies to develop dynamic evidence and memory management frameworks, processes, systems of supportive multiple rights in records and record keeping, and is of course well known to both ASA conferences and ASA audiences. So welcome to our three speakers. Now, jumping from my very small iPhone, and apologies, I should have prepared for that more, to my notes. So what we will do, we are really keen, we've got Janet there. Excellent. So what we'll do is we will have each of the speakers, we'll start with Jan, then move to Manting, then to Joanne, but in between there's going to be opportunities for questions. So after Jan gives her presentation, we'll stop for a bit and there's an opportunity for questions, so don't hold on to the end, we're not going to do that, it's going to be dynamic, and I will hope you will have a couple of questions, and then we'll do that, and then we'll have a panel discussion as well. So also, those online, hybrid questions, please send them through as well, and I will check in to make sure whether or not your questions are being asked and then answered. Thank you very much. And Jan, welcome. Hopefully you heard the introduction there, and well, over to you. I can't see you here, so I'm going to assume it's all working. Thanks, Jan.
Okay, hello everybody.
Jan.
I'll just move straight into my presentation.
Yeah. Can Jan hear us or not?
I can hear you.
Oh, Jan, you're absolutely right, because why she's hesitating is that I was going to give a very brief introduction to what Jan is talking about.
Yeah.
Thanks for keeping me on my roll, Jan. So, Jan was engaged by the ASA last year to develop to review archival higher education sector and to make some recommendations for the Australian Society of Archivists. And I guess it was responding on the ASA's part, well, one, it had been a desire over some years responding to changes in the higher education sector, but, and Council had on its agenda for a while to look at the sector and what Council could do to make a difference. But also there had been some recent closures of university programs, as well as challenges to what it means to be a professional archivist. The ASA rules combine university education and professional accredited status very clearly. And there is an expectation that you will undertake one of those university accredited courses to build your professional status. So there's a challenge there if that's where if the universities aren't delivering the accredited education that we expect, how are we going to sustain professionalisation? Or do we actually need to review what we're doing in that space and start again? And we heard this morning about some of the challenges of being at university, of attracting a diverse and not just multicultural, but also more First Nations archivists into the profession. So there's a lot of challenges that are out there and that have been thought through and discussed for many years by people. So we're lucky to have Jan available to review some of those both national but also international trends and put together some recommendations. You may have heard yesterday Nicola, the ASA president, Nicola Ront, mentioned that the ASA Council had endorsed the review which was finished, and the recommendations came through in February this year and endorsed, and is looking to support the program, I guess, with an education officer. Now that role, if anyone is interested or knows of somebody who is interested, do reach out to the council, because they are shortly going to seek recruitment for that role. So now, with proper introduction, Jan, over to you. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you, Julia. My first slide just does list what were the outcomes of this review that I was engaged by the ASA to undertake at the end of last year. And as Julia said, basically looking at what's happening in university education in Australia and internationally as far as the archives and records management field is concerned, to look at industry employment trends, and particularly to consult with the current and former educators in this field on, what needs to happen in terms of sustainable higher education for archivists, because I'm sure many of you are aware that there's been considerable closures of information management schools, not only in Australia but also worldwide, and so obviously it's something that the profession needs to respond to. And of course, finally, I was asked to try and find some sustainable business models that could drive this whole thing forward. So I'll just briefly explain the approach that I took. So obviously extensive desk research, and I interviewed all the representatives of all the universities which still currently offer education in this field. I consulted with the ASA membership and also with employers. And the findings actually focused on 4 areas, which were what was happening with the current university archival programs, what are the skills and knowledge that not only new graduates need in entering the profession, but also the ongoing knowledge that is needed by professionals as they progress through their careers. The whole area of accreditation, CPD and professional recognition, which is obviously greatly linked to this area. And finally, industry employment trends. So I will very briefly, talk about each of those areas, but obviously if you need the detail, you can go to the report, which is available on the ASA website. So obviously, in terms of looking at what's happening in universities in Australia, there was a need to look at what was happening overseas. So I looked at programs in several countries, mainly guided by the countries which the Accreditation and Professional Training Committee, the ASA, thought would be the most useful ones. So firstly, the UK, there are still 6 programs remaining in the UK, which are accredited by the ARA, which is a very active professional association. And when I last spoke to my contacts there, they were actually reviewing their accreditation process, very much looking at the same sorts of things as the ASA review looked at, how to strengthen university programs, how to make sure that the profession survives, really. They have also experienced lots of closures reputable universities such as Loughborough, which was actually my alma mater, where, you know, there's been strong information programs for many years. I also looked at several European countries where the provision of university archival programs is actually quite disparate and not very different things seem to happen in different countries, but it's the same sort of story, that the number of programs offered is diminishing. And then I looked at North America. Now, in Canada, there are still 5 master's programs that survive, but they are not accredited by the Professional Association. But interestingly, one of those programs was facing closure, and the program, with the support of the Association of Canadian Archivists and the profession generally, did manage to do a lot of work and were able to prevent that program from closing. And probably the most positive story is the USA, where there are still at least 7 programs. The Society of American Archivists doesn't accredit these programs, it only provides guidelines, but accreditation is provided by the American Library Association. One of the reasons in the USA it seems that programs are still relatively successful is because to a certain extent the role of the information professions in the USA is much better understood, and therefore much more valued. And also, particularly in the archives and records field, there are many positions within government institutions, which does tend to lead to more visibility of the profession. However, we'll move on to look at what's happening in Australia. So I interviewed staff from the 4 universities which still maintain either a program or courses in the archives and records management area. Only 3 programs remain, and all 3 offer a master's program with a specialisation in archives and records, which is reached through a graduate diploma normally, and also a graduate certificate. There is only one undergraduate degree, which is offered by Charles Sturt University, who also offer a graduate certificate in AV archiving. And all those programs are still within the accreditation process at the moment. Some of the issues for Australian programs are to a certain extent centred around curriculum, particularly the coverage of digitisation and associated skill sets, which obviously affect all workplaces now. Another issue is problems with finding practicum placements for students. It's obviously something that has been exacerbated by the pandemic, but it was a problem before that, and I'll speak to that a little bit later on. CSU does have the largest program as far as archives and records management education is concerned, and their courses have been reviewed in the last year with the archives and records content redesigned, and they are actually hoping that from 2024 they will be able to offer a graduate certificate in digital archiving, and that will be in collaboration with the National Archives of Australia. And they've also joined the Digital Preservation Coalition with a view to gaining input to course content and also to provide opportunities for students. So that is a very positive thing to note. One of the main things that was of interest was the skills and knowledge base required, as I briefly mentioned earlier on. And there was some criticism by stakeholders of the skills and knowledge of new graduates, but I think that has to be considered in view of the fact that some employers, and I do say only some employers, do not acknowledge the need for ongoing workplace training. And this was actually something that did come out of a review that CARA had done in 2020. Sometimes it is that lack of understanding of the need for ongoing workplace training. Sometimes it is lack of resources to be able to provide that workplace training. But I suppose as an educator, I've always seen that there is a problem in that sometimes there's not an understanding of the limit of what can be passed on to graduates within, say, the constraints of a one-year master's degree. So, you know, there are two sides to this problem, so to speak. Some of the areas which have been highlighted as becoming increasingly relevant to the profession and therefore needing to be covered in university courses, but also in ongoing workplace training, are listed here. And I mean, as you can see, they are all areas which are relevant to the newer technologies now being used and the need to be able to record and curate the records that are created by them. The next issue was accreditation, continuing professional development and professional recognition. Now, the accreditation of universal archival education programs is administered in most countries by the relevant professional association, and that is, of course, the case here in Australia, where the ASA accredits university programs through its accreditation and professional training committee in cooperation with RIMPA. This committee also administers the professional recognition scheme, which is administered by the ASA. Now, this scheme is not well subscribed to, and it is not linked to continuing professional development, which awards credits towards a required level of ongoing professional learning. Now, that is not the normal way of things as far as most professional associations are concerned. Because obviously, if ongoing CPD is a requirement of professional recognition, then that is going to enable a very high level of professionalism across the sector. So this is something that needs to be considered. And of course, the ASA also provides an online learning program. Now, to look at employment trends, I carried out fairly extensive industry consultation with focus groups from employers, with members of CARA, and also individually with individual employers to try and get a very wide view of what employers felt about what was happening as far as trends are concerned. And the subjective view was that there was steady employment in the field, but no increase was projected. And when I looked at the statistics from official sources, they showed that that steady employment was certainly what was expected to happen. There was some discussion around the fact that, you know, that baby boomers are heading for retirement and that might create some jobs or movement. The question mark is there because there were two viewpoints on this. Yes, baby boomers are heading for retirement, and within the archives and records professions, there is overrepresentation of people over 50. And but nevertheless, some felt that although those positions were going to be vacated, they may not necessarily be filled by people who actually had the relevant qualifications, if indeed they were filled at all. So there are two sides to that view. There was a feeling that the skills and knowledge that archives and records management professionals have that can apply outside the traditional roles should be promoted to the wider industry. This relates very much to that understanding of what the profession actually does and the skills that they have. And many people commented that within their own organisations there wasn't that understanding, and if there was that better understanding, more people from the profession could be employed, basically. And another disturbing trend, which is also being seen in other countries, is that increasingly many positions are only temporary or part-time. So those were the main issues that I considered. So I'll now move on to talk about some of the business models that came out of that and what future action ought to be. So as far as business models are concerned, obviously it's very important not to undermine existing university programs, and they need to be fully supported. And this relates totally to maintaining the professional status of archivists and records management. Some of you may be aware that ALIA has been working on a new initiative over at least the last 12 months, looking at very similar outcomes as this review for the ASA did, and I think there are probably possibilities there to feed into that process, and I'll talk about that a little later on. There also emerged this need to have a separate accreditation pathway for digital archivists, which is something which is rapidly emerging as a specialisation within the profession. So I'll just talk a little bit more about some of these things. So support of current university programs. I mean, obviously there needs to be ongoing discussion about curriculum and what needs to be in the curriculum in addition to the accreditation process, and much closer collaboration with the educators. Going back to that problem of practicum placements, ASA and CARA should be encouraging their members to provide practicum placements, and also to lobby for cadetships and internships. Some of you may be aware of the 2019 report, Sculpting a National Plan, which actually looks specifically at cadetships for the GLAM sector. There used to be quite a few, I think even the NAA did have one which has sort of not happened in the last few years, and they have decided to consider reintroducing it, but it needs to be followed through. Also, expanding accreditation to graduate certificates. Graduate certificates could provide a pathway for two groups, namely those people who are interested in working in archives and records but come from a different discipline, have a different type of first degree, and also people who might come from a slightly disadvantaged background, because a graduate certificate offers a first step in a pathway towards full professional qualification and recognition. And there's also a need to formalise the ASA mentoring scheme. There is a mentoring scheme. It's not particularly well, it doesn't seem to be very well publicised, and if it was more formal, it could be used, for example, to support new graduates and all sorts of other things as well. The other area that arose out of the review was paraprofessional qualifications. It would be worth considering a paraprofessional pathway to ASA membership, and there should also be an investigation into the parameters for a paraprofessional qualification in archival studies. There are already several relevant vet units available, and of course there is in any case a vet qualification in the records management field already in existence, and those things could be looked at, and links could be provided to anything that was set up within the ASA online learning programme. It's quite clear that the ASA professional recognition scheme needs to be redesigned. It should be credit-based and in line with what other professional associations do. And it would make ongoing CPD a requirement for continuing professional recognition. There should be, I should correct myself, there is a pathway for candidates with a degree for non-archival disciplines to gain professional recognition by the ASA, but it is not well publicised or promoted. And that's something that needs to be worked on, as does that accreditation pathway for digital archivists, which I did mention earlier on. Obviously, the extension of the ASA online learning programme feeds into this, and it's an initiative that could be achieved without significant financial outlay, and there are all sorts of possibilities, such as partnerships with universities, looking at micro-credentialing programmes, and in doing that, with the online learning programme being part of the ASA, it means that there can be retention of that Australian focus on content, and also it provides the opportunity to address some of those gaps in skills and knowledge that were identified by potential employers. This all leads to the recommendation that there should be an ASA education officer, and as Julia has already mentioned, this is actually being actioned. There are many things that this person could do: liaise with educators and other professional organisations, look at the parameters for a paraprofessional qualification, liaise with employers, look at the extension of the online learning programme, and also potentially liaise with the ALIA Pathways programme. So that is definitely happening. Another thing that comes up is the promotion of the role of the archivist and records management. Now, managers, I beg your pardon. I mean, this is something that I think is not new to many of us. I certainly know it's something that I've had to deal with throughout my career, but it's something we can't forget about. So we need to do some of these things: develop a professional profile, encourage the requirement for ASA professional recognition in job descriptions, and so on. There are many things that could be done here, and I think although we feel it sometimes it's a contentious thing to have to do it, I think we can't forget about it. I'll just go back now to just say a little bit about the ALIA Professional Pathways programme. It's highly relevant to the outcomes of this review, and it really does reflect the sorts of things the ASA want, because ALIA's aim is to revitalise the profession, to attract people to the profession from other disciplines, and to strengthen existing university programmes. So there are obviously benefits for collaboration, which would include things like lobbying, liaising with university funders, working on the ideas of paraprofessional certification, and looking at alternative pathways to professional recognition. And in all of those things, I think it has to be acknowledged that two professional associations working together, or certainly collaborating, is going to be much stronger than one working on its own. So it's something to be considered. And my final point is just really a fallback position if all university programmes were to close, which obviously we certainly hope will not happen, but I think it has to be recognised that it could. And that would be that the ASA would have to return to regulating its own qualifications, but that's just, as I said, a fallback position. So I hope that that has given you a reasonable overview of the things that the review looked at. And as I said, there is a lot more detail in the report, but obviously we can discuss that further.
Thank you, Jan. That's fantastic. And what we might do, as we said before, Manting is going to look at cultural competencies shortly. But before we do that, we might see if there are any questions specifically on what, as you can see, was a very in-depth report and with a lot of food for thought, particularly for the education officer. Any questions from the floor? Students here with the microphone. Any thoughts yet? Challenges ahead that ring true? Fiona, thank you.
Hi, it's can you hear me? Can you hear me, Jan?
Not very well.
Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Just thinking about the last terrifying suggestion that you're making with regard to regulating qualifications ourselves, it made me think of a point you made, or a description you made earlier in your presentation about how the Society of American Archivists don't accredit but provide guidelines, but the American Library Association do accredit. How well does that work, do you know, in terms of maintaining a distinct information practice? Are those guidelines strong enough, do you think, for the Library Association to be able to adequately accredit archiving courses and subjects?
I actually don't know who's asking that question, sorry.
That's Fiona.
Fiona.
Oh, Fiona. Oh, okay. I don't know a lot about, I don't have a lot of detail about that, but I mean, the ALA is a very strong professional association and they have very good processes in place. I imagine that they do work in collaboration with the SAA. I did see that in my report I do detail in the literature something that was written quite recently which said that the guidelines which the Society of American Archivists provide actually do not have a lot of influence on the way that those university programs are run. But that's all the information I have currently.
Joanne?
Yeah, I can probably jump in on that from a little bit of experience in being part of the Archival Education and Research Initiative. And I guess the strength of my archives and record keeping colleagues in the US, I think, play a big part in making sure that there is that understanding of what archives and records curriculum can, is and should be. So I think that that's a force which makes those courses highly relevant to the profession, is the advocacy and strength of the educators. Yeah.
Thanks. Any online questions there? Yes? Stuart? Don't disappear at the important minute.
It's just a comment from the discussion forum from Angela McGing. She says, positions not being filled or abolished altogether is happening a little too often. That's it.
Yes.
Thanks, Angela. Hopefully you heard that, yeah. All right. Thank you, Jan, and thanks the audience for some thought. As I said, keep those thoughts and questions coming.